Education and Community Programming Manager at the Dalí Museum. Today, we are joined by the Dalí Museum's Education Director and Co-Director of Innovation Labs, Dr. Kim Macuare. But before we get to Dr. Kim Macuare, speaking about visual thinking strategies, I would like to importantly thank the City of St. Petersburg for their continued support, especially during this time. Thank you. Also, a thank you to our members who make events like this possible. Thank you. And a special thank you to all of our contributing sponsors for this exhibition, The Subversive Eye, with a deep appreciation for surrealist photography, our presenting sponsor, Marianne R. Rich. A thank you to our sponsor, Ingrid and Jake Jacobs, and Adele Visaggio. Thank you. And thank you to our airport partners, St. Petersburg Clearwater International Airport, and our hotel partner, Trade Winds Resort on St. Pete Beach. Thank you to our sponsors. We appreciate you. Now to some of our February events. We've had a few till today. So we had a wonderful workshop last night and some other awesome things. But today I would like to talk about this first event, which is going to be amazing. We still have tickets available. Please make sure you go to our website, thedalí.org, to get your ticket for a performance Until the River Never Grieves, which was written, produced by Bob Devin Jones, which I found out last night. He has the key to the city. So definitely come in and support. And then also on the 12th, Wednesday, we have Art and Meditation. Come and find peace here in our theater. And then the 13th, we have Poetry at the Dalí by our former St. Pete Poet Laureate, Helen Pruitt-Wallace. It's a great experience. She always has some wonderful writers. They've won all the amazing awards you can win for literary art. So definitely check that out. And Art and Meditation, Poetry, they're free events. On the 16th, we have Yoga at the Dalí in our Raymond James Community Room right next door. And then we have a special lecture on Monday, the 17th, Lecture Artist Books. It's not on our website just yet, but please stay tuned for more information about that lecture. On the 20th, we have Surreal Nights at the Dalí, which is a free event on our first floor where we have a DJ come in, and then we also have discount cocktails and always a wonderful activity in our Raymond James room, whether it's artsy, free tequila, free chocolate. Definitely check that out. Bring all your friends. And then our membership manager, Megan Moyer, she is amazing, and she reminded me to add this little note at the bottom. Members of the museum receive 50% off on Wednesdays for the Dalí 360 Alive Dome showing. So definitely get your ticket today, because today is Wednesday. So please visit our website, thedalí.org, for more information about these events. And then another special thing you've never seen before for Coffee with the Curator, please go and vote for the Dalí Museum. This is for the top 10 of US Today's best museums. If you scan this link, you can just open your phone right now. You don't have to do it right now, but you can do it right now. And you open your phone, your camera on your phone, and a link will pop up. So I'll give you a moment for that. And for those, I'm gonna break the fourth wall, watching at home, you can just pause the video and take a screenshot. And this QR code will open straight to the link, and you can just submit your vote. We are going against the world, so stay surreal with us. Alrighty, and we are streaming live to our YouTube channel, and you can always find our Coffee with the Curator series on our YouTube channel, the Dalí Museum, and you can revisit this if you would like to share the QR code with other people. And then for our next Coffee with the Curator, it will be presented by Allison McCarthy, our Associate Curator and Preparator in the Curatorial Department, and I'm sure some of you may have seen her here and there, maybe looking around some artwork or framing something or hanging something up on the wall, a wonderful work of art. And she frames our artwork quite often. So join us for her talk on the Subverting the Subversive, Women, Vision, and Power, and that's March 5th, 10:30 a.m. It will be during the Grand Prix time, which we are also excited about. And so if you're unable to join us in person, please visit our website. You can go to the link where you can find Coffee with the Curator. You can click Stream Now, and it will take you to the area where you can stream and watch from home, or you can go on our YouTube channel the day of, and you'll see it live there. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Kimberly Macuare. She is, I always say this, and I know the term is weird, but she's my boss, and I've been working with her for many, many years now, a wonderful person, and this is my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Kim Macuare, the Director of Education and Co-Director of Innovation Labs at the Dalí. Is an experienced educator, curriculum designer, and facilitator. For over 20 years, she has designed world-class learning experiences for college courses, workshops, leadership retreats, team building sessions, and keynote presentations, and most recently has been responsible for the award-winning curriculum of creativity and innovation workshops and offerings at the Innovation Labs at the Dalí. In her role at the Dalí, she has helped a wide range of organizations from local nonprofits, CASA, and community foundations of Tampa Bay to educational institutions, the University of South Florida, and Florida Poly, to Fortunate 100 companies, Bank of America, and IBM, build their innovation capabilities by developing creatively focused mindsets and learning key creative problem-solving skills. In addition to supporting external clients, she also takes an active role in innovation projects and initiatives across the Dalí Museum. She creates new programs for the museum's audience and leads all staff creative thinking and problem solving, which is a fun part of our job. She has extensive experience in art-based creativity training and is a certified trainer of leading research-based creativity and innovation tools for set mindset tools, and she's a well-certified facilitator of Lego series play, and we love Legos. We love Legos here. She also teaches a creativity course in Muma College of Business and University of South Florida. Kim holds a BA in English from the University of Cincinnati, an MA in English from Ohio State University, and a PhD in English with a specialization in medieval literature and economics from the Ohio State University. I almost cut some of this information, but everything is so awesome. So I appreciate you all for taking it in with me. She is a wonderful person who does a lot for the community. So please welcome me in thanking Dr. Kimberly Macuare.
Thank you, Joy, for that amazing introduction. And as Joy was giving the introduction, I wondered at what moment it becomes more honest to replace over 20 years with over 30. You know, it's a little bit of a difference, but over 20, it covers the over 30, right? It's all good. So when Joy was reading my bio and she mentioned arts-based creativity tools, one of those tools is what we are here to talk about today, which is visual thinking strategies, or as it's known by its practitioners, VTS, which originally began as a museum technique for looking at art, but has really moved into a lot of other realms, including K-12 education, medical school, and most recently into the business world. And so today I want to share with you a little bit about that technique. We're even going to practice it. And then we'll look at some of its applications. And then we'll end by thinking about how you might go up to the gallery, whether you want to go to our permanent collection, or maybe this is a really interesting entry point for you into our special exhibition right now, The Subversive Eye, which is full of amazing photographs that might benefit from the application of this technique. So let's go ahead and get started. So I want to begin with something that seems really obvious. The act of looking. Something that for the majority of us comes very naturally. we don't really think about it. So I thought maybe I would just ask you to look at something. He's moving ahead with my presentation already. So I left that image up there for 10 seconds because 10 seconds is the mode time that people look at something in an art museum. Yeah, that's the mode time. So that's the most frequent time that people spend looking at something is 10 seconds. And as you might imagine, when people look at something for such a brief amount of time, the only thing that they can pick up is maybe the barest impressions, the simplest ideas around it. However, if we were to spend more time with the canvas, then more things might unfold. However, the reason that visual thinking strategies, one of the reasons that it came to be, is that a lot of the reasons that people spend just the 10 seconds in front of the canvas is because they're not always sure how to engage, grapple, stay with a piece of art for an extended period of time. And one of the great things about visual thinking strategies is it gives you a scaffold for that time. And so it's a way for us to see more. And that's what I like to think. It's just spending more time, you will notice more. Spending more time combined with a thinking technique like visual thinking strategies is like supercharging your looking. Yeah, it's like putting on 10 times goggles and being able to see more. So the visual thinking in visual thinking strategies comes from a researcher named Rudolf Arnheim, and his work in Gestalt psychology led him to write about the connection between visual perception and thought, which he called visual thinking. In his view, what he noticed was seeing is actually an act of cognition. Like we try to separate those two things very frequently. We're like, we looked and then we thought, as if those two things were, disparate objects. And what Arnheim is suggesting that actually that is not true, that seeing itself is an act of cognition, and that we are thinking even as we sort out what we see, that this is an interchange. And so VTS, or visual thinking strategies, builds on that premise because it allows us to parse out how are we thinking as we're seeing, and how can we make that encounter more useful for us. So the origins of visual thinking strategies lie in the work of two individuals primarily, Abigail Hausen and Philip Yenawine. And Abigail was an academic who was involved in research on aesthetic stages, which we'll get to in a minute. And Philip Yenawine worked in museum education. And they, in the early 90s, got together and started what we now know today as visual thinking strategies, or VTS. And like many things, it arose from a problem. Yeah, I'm the co-director of the innovation labs. A lot of what I focus on is how do we solve problems? How do we solve problems in creative new ways? And VTS is an innovation that was created to solve a specific problem. So the context. So Philip Yenawine worked at MoMA as the director of education. How many people here have been to MoMA? Yeah, it's an amazing institution, lots of incredible, not only art on the walls, but a lot of amazing programming. And of course, at the time, Philip was responsible for that. And in 1987, he was called upon to assess the education program's impact on its visitors. Yeah, so when people were coming to the museum and they were participating in the programs, whether that was a lecture or a performance or a gallery talk. How was that really impacting them? And what they found was something that really kind of shook Philip Yenawine to his core as the director of education. And what he found was people almost universally appreciated and enjoyed the programming experiences. They loved them because the people who were giving them were amazing and passionate and knowledgeable. However, they retained very little of the information that they had taken in. Even right after, even when they were evaluated, right after an experience, they retained very little of what they had heard. And sometimes they misremembered things. And what he figured out was the reason behind that is because the methods being used didn't match the needs of most of the visitors. So what they were offering wasn't necessarily what the majority of people who were coming there needed at that moment. And the best way that I can explain this is, imagine that you are somebody coming to an art museum and maybe you're not that experienced with art museums. Yeah, you've been to a couple maybe, but perhaps you've never had an art history class, you've never had any specific training in looking or art, and all of a sudden you're learning all of these facts and interesting stories about these works. It's kind of like if you were a beginning reader and somebody started to give you the literary analysis of Tolstoy's War and Peace. And they're like, okay, this is what's going on. And you're like, okay. And what they found was they needed a way for people to have an experience that was more matched to what they were doing at the viewing level. So this led him to connect with Abigail Housen, who was doing research on how people look at art and what their experiences with it are. And her thesis suggested that viewers' approach to learning, so as they're looking, the more they look, they're learning, right? The more you do something, the better you get at it, right? So when you're reading, for example, the more you read, the better you get at reading. The more you look, the better you get at looking. And she found that that approach to learning mirrored the constructivist principle about teaching, that students, and here you can replace students with viewers. It doesn't have to be students as we think of K-12 students, cannot effectively internalize prepackaged answers. Learners must go beyond the role of a passive receiver of information and experience understandings firsthand. Meanings are discovered and constructed for oneself. So that's just a fancy way of saying that, you can't just tell somebody that this is what the thing is. You have to create an experience where they come to that understanding by themselves. And when you do that, that learning sticks for them. And how many people in here, I know it's been a long time for me, but remember the experience of being in school and you crammed for an exam? Come on, be honest, raise your hand. And then how many of you can tell me what you learned right now when you crammed for that exam? Yeah, how to pass the test, yeah. I mean, I had 3 quarters of introduction to geology in college, and I can promise you I got an A every quarter. And if you ask me anything about geology right now, I'd be hard-pressed. And that's because I was just intaking prepackaged information. I wasn't really coming to the understandings myself. So what did she do? So Housen ended up conducting over 4,000 interviews. And the way that she did this was that she would take an object, a painting, a photograph, a sculpture, some type of artwork. It's really irrespective of medium. And she would ask the person who was looking at it, what's going on in this picture? Or this sculpture or this photograph. And she would just let them talk about what they were seeing. And then afterwards, and the only other thing that they would insert as the interviewers was, anything else? Is there anything else? To see if there was other observations they wanted to make. But other than that, they would not intervene. And after those 4,000 interviews, what they did was they sat down and they looked at the 4,000 interviews and they noticed patterns in the interviews. And those patterns allowed them to establish a theory that is known as aesthetic stages. And so each stage is connected to a certain kind of looking or interaction with a piece of art. So aesthetic stage 1, and I've tried to highlight here the words that are more important with the blue font. Accountive viewers are storytellers, using their senses, memories, and personal associations. They make concrete observations about a work of art that are woven into a narrative. Here, judgments are based on what is known and what is liked. Emotions color viewers' comments as they seem to enter the work of art and become part of its unfolding narrative. So a stage 1 viewer, that is how they might look at a piece of art. The comments that they make would correspond to this. And stage 1, I don't want you to confuse this with like, oh, stage 1 is for kids, and then like as you become an adult. There's plenty of adults who are stage 1 viewers, because all that means is the experiences that people have had with art haven't been very extensive, right? They're not accustomed to viewing. And we actually are here at the Dalí Museum, and I know that here I have a lot of members, I have a lot of longtime audience members who come to our lectures and our programs, but we at the Dalí Museum actually receive a very high proportion of visitors who this is their first visit ever to an art museum. What an honor. What an honor to be able to guide someone in establishing a connection with art and a love for beauty. Now, I thought I might just give you a little example to make this more concrete. So I'm going to use the same Dalí each time. So a viewer in stage 1 might make comments like about what they see. They might say, oh, you know, I see 2 figures dancing, or I see, and start to storytell maybe, oh, I see a mom giving their kid a hug. Starting to make up a story that connects from their own experience with what they're seeing. They might be guided to make judgments based on what they like. You know, like they might say, you know, I don't like that sky. It looks like it's gonna rain, it's too dark. So judgments that are in that zone. And they might make comments about the people, like for example, they might say, oh, that man under the bridge is really sad. You know, because connecting to emotions. Now, aesthetic stage 2 viewers. Constructive viewers set about building a framework for looking at works of art using the most logical and accessible tools, their own perceptions, their knowledge of the natural world, and the values of their social, moral, and conventional world. If the work does not look the way it is supposed to, if craft skill, technique, hard work, utility, and function are not evident, or if the subject seems inappropriate, then these viewers judge the work to be weird, lacking, or of no value. Their sense of what is realistic is the standard often applied to determine value. As emotions begin to go underground, these viewers begin to distance themselves from the work of art. So it's not as much of an emotional response now, it's how well is the artist making things look real or correspond to what they know to be true. And I know you've probably been in an art museum and you've been standing with someone who's like, my kid could do that. Yeah. So if we're thinking about an aesthetic stage 2 viewer, when they are looking at this, they might make comments about how unrealistic these figures look. They're elongated. They don't look right. They're not in proportion with what we might think of as normal people. And some of the ones that are on the bridge are transparent. And so they might notice that those things kind of like look wrong. Or in this case, very naturalistic colors are used. But in other works where non-natural colors are used, they might wonder about the use of those colors. Like, why would they paint the sky that color? That's not the color skies are. So those observations are more in that vein of kind of how well does this correspond to what I know to be true, both physically and conventionally for the world that I live in. Aesthetic stage 3. Classifying viewers adopt the analytical and critical stance of the art historian. They want to identify the work as to place, school, style, time, and provenance. They decode the work using their library of facts and figures that they're ready and eager to expand. This viewer believes that properly categorized, the work of art's meaning and message can be explained and rationalized. So this is believing that if you kind of like know all of the nuts and bolts behind it, then that explains it, that's all there is to know about it. This was painted in X year by X person, clearly in the style of X, and therefore this is what the painting is or what it means. So a stage 3 viewer might be really interested in how they might use visual clues here to identify what style it's in, looking at the label, knowing something about Dalí and his career. They might think about what was going on at that time with Dalí and how that might have impacted what he was doing. So they're really trying to kind of like identify the work and pin it down to a specific set of art historical facts. Aesthetic stage 4, interpretive. Interpretive viewers seek a personal encounter with a work of art, exploring the work, letting its meaning slowly unfold. They appreciate subtleties of line and shape and color. Now critical skills are put in the service of feelings and intuitions as these viewers let underlying meanings of the work and what it symbolizes emerge. Each new encounter with a work of art presents a chance for new comparisons, insights, and experiences, knowing that the work of art's identity and value are subject to reinterpretation. These viewers see their own processes subject to chance and change. So rather than seeing the encounter as fixed and only knowable through a set of facts, the stage 4 viewer realizes that every time you come to it, there can be a different kind of experience, and the observations about the formal qualities of the work are connected also to the emotional responses that one is having. So if you were going to think about a stage 4 viewer looking at this work, then you might come back to something maybe the stage 2 viewer noticed, which is these bodies don't seem right. And then think about, well, why might that be? Why might Dalí draw these bodies in this way? What might the transparency of the bodies on the bridge signify? Does it signify that they're becoming less corporeal because they're entering another realm, which differentiates them from some of the more solid figures at the base of the bridge? Is there some kind of stages going on here of transformation? Those kinds of comments would be in your stage 4 realm. And then the final aesthetic stage identified by Howson's research is aesthetic stage 5. And aesthetic stage 5 is the recreative viewer who have a long history of viewing and reflecting about works of art, and they now willingly suspend disbelief. A familiar painting is like an old friend who is known intimately, yet full of surprise, deserving attention on a daily level, but also existing on an elevated plane. As in all important friendships, time is a key ingredient, allowing stage 5 viewers to know the ecology of a work, its time, its history, its questions, its travels, its intricacies. Drawing on their own history with one work in particular, and with viewing in general, these viewers combine personal contemplation with views that broadly encompass universal concerns. Here, memory infuses the landscape of the painting, intricately combining the personal and the universal. So if we were thinking about a stage 5 viewer, then this might be a painting that this viewer has had a long relationship with. And I think about myself. I've been working in this museum for, in 1 week, I think it is, 7 years. And I have developed an intimate relationship with several of the paintings in the gallery that I come back to. And I see new things, or I notice new things, and they become clear to me as they change over time. So that's the kind of thing a stage 5 viewer might notice is every time I look at this painting, blah, 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 I notice something. Or, coming back to this now, thinking about this new facet, and weave that into their understanding or their narrative of the painting. So those are Abigail Housen's aesthetic stages. And when Philip Yenawine read her research, he was like, okay, I get this. I get what's going on. Because most of the people who were coming to MoMA were stage 1 and stage 2 viewers, but they were being given material that wasn't really appropriate for those viewing stages. Or not appropriate, that's not the right word. It wasn't the material that was going to be most beneficial in growing their skills of looking and engaging with a piece of art. And so they together decided to create the VTS method. And the VTS method is deceptively simple, and it involves a stimulus. So you have to have an art object. It could be real life, or it can be a reproduction. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be a photograph. New York Times runs like a continuing feature in conjunction with Visual Thinking Strategies organization. It's called How Do You Look? And it's a different picture each time. A way to focus attention through a carefully crafted set of questions, which we're going to get to, and a process of dialogue that unfolds and allows the learning to happen. So Joy mentioned that I was an English professor in my former life. And if you know anything about English, you probably know like the cardinal rule of writing, which is show, don't tell. Yeah? If you tell people, they're like, yeah, show them. So we're going to do it. We're just going to do a live visual thinking strategies right now. Okay? Yeah. So Joy has the microphone. So if you are going to make a comment, then I will have her go around. And before we get started, I'm going to also assign a couple of assignments for you. In addition to following my prompts as I step out of my role as lecturer here and into my role as facilitator of the VTS process, I'm going to ask you to do some things. So one of those is going to be obviously to follow what I say when I'm doing the VTS. But the other is I want you to pay attention to 3 things. Okay? And the 3 things I want you to pay attention to are, what are the questions that I ask? Because remember, VTS involves a stimulus, carefully crafted questions, and a dialogue. So what are the questions that I ask? That's one thing I want you to pay attention to. The second thing I want you to pay attention to is when I respond to you, how do I respond to you? And what language is used in that response? And the third thing that I want you to make attention to as you're listening to people comment and my respond to them is, how am I connecting people's comments? Okay? It's a lot, right? Maybe I should divide you into thirds. Okay, this third does the questions, this third does this. No, you all can handle it. Great multitaskers. So let's do it. I purposely picked a work that was not a Dalí because I didn't want you to be too familiar with it. So please take a moment to look at this image. What's going on in this picture? What's going on in this picture? Just raise your hand and Joy will bring you the mic. Okay,
Reading? They're reading. They're learning.
okay, so you're noticing the figures and you're thinking about what action these figures might be engaged in, and you're thinking that they could be reading or learning. What do you see that makes you say learning?
Please raise your hand for the microphone.
Okay, so here you're noticing what you think could be books, and you associate books with learning, and so you think that's what makes you think that these figures could be learning. Okay, what more can we find?
Excuse me. Can you pass the microphone?
It actually looks like they're writing, almost like women monks.
Okay, keep the mic for a second. Okay, so you are coming back to these figures, and rather than reading, you're thinking that perhaps these figures are engaged in another activity, which could be writing.
If you look at the two figures on the left, each of them looks like they have a pen or something, a stylus.
So you're noticing that these figures seem to be holding something, and you're thinking that it could be a pen or a stylus, and that makes you think that they could be writing. You've also noticed that these figures are dressed in a certain way, and you're connecting that to potentially being...
I think of monks in a scriptorium in a 12th century monastery. But they're women.
Okay, so
And women weren't monks, I don't think. Maybe they were.
So you're thinking about these figures, and you're thinking that these figures might be women, and you're wondering how that might be because you're associating this scene with a very particular place in time and history based on your experience, and you're thinking that this could be a scriptorium.
Yep.
And that perhaps these figures are involved in some kind of writing. Okay, what more can we find? I saw a hand here in the front.
Hi, I'm seeing the central figure in the middle sort of stirring something, and it feels like there is a creation of something to what's below, the city, the countryside. I don't know if it's goodwill or education, but like it feels like he's creating something and then processing it through the characters along the side of this building.
Okay, keep the mic.
Okay.
Okay, so you are drawing our attention to a different figure here, this figure in the center, and you're wondering about the action that this figure is involved in. We've talked about these other figures and what they might be doing. You're thinking about this one, and you're thinking that this figure seems to be stirring something, and you're thinking that whatever they're stirring is somehow connected to what's going on outside of the internal space.
Yeah, you can sort of see the lines from that hourglass urn going to each of the scribes, as someone described earlier. And then the scribe's work is being pushed out into the village below and the countryside below.
Okay, so you're noticing what could be some kind of strings or lines, and you're thinking that these could be attached to these other figures and somehow connected to their work, and then that whatever work they're doing is then perhaps involved in creating the scene outside.
Yes.
Okay? What more can we find? Okay. Poor Joy, I'm making her run back and forth.
I'm smelling something. And I'm hearing something. The center figure is certainly stirring something in the hourglass urn, and I'm smelling frankincense or something sensory that stimulates the students. And I believe this is an image of women studying, perhaps writing. They're in uniform. The center figure is their teacher. And in addition to the sensory experience that stimulates the students, in the back, seated, is another figure. And it appears to me that figure has a recorder, an instrument, in their hand. And the sounds that are coming from that also benefits the students. Okay. What I can't quite grasp is what's leaving the building through the slots. And I'd like somebody to help me there.
Okay. Okay, so here, as other people have noticed, there seems to be a lot of attention on the activity of the figures and trying to figure out what this might be in the service of. And here you're coming back to the central figure, and you're saying that we've been talking a lot about the visual stimuli here, but you're suggesting there might be other sensory stimuli. And you're thinking that perhaps whatever is being stirred here could be some kind of essence like frankincense. And then you're noticing that there's a figure that we have yet to talk about, who is here in the back, who seems to be holding something, which could be a musical instrument. You suggest could be a recorder. And you're thinking that that also gives you the sense that there might be music being played. And then you're wondering, how might all of this be connected to what's then coming out of the building?
Thank you for listening.
Yeah. So we've got two in the back. We'll take these two in the back and then we'll stop, because I could go on forever, to be honest, but I want to make sure I get you out of here in a timely manner.
So I believe that the figures sitting down are actually doing a needlepoint or a tapestry type of thing. And as it's being created, it's being, it keeps on because it's on a roll underneath. And that's what's coming out of the building as they work on that. And I believe the two figures are keeping them entertained and on time, doing things by playing music and reading to them while they do this, might be tedious or monotonous work.
Okay, so now we're coming back to these figures, their action, and we're thinking a little bit about their social relationships a little bit more. It's been suggested that the activity the figures are engaged in could be reading, could be writing, and now you're adding on to those suggestions, thinking that perhaps this is some kind of embroidery that is being done on what looks like it could be rolls of cloth that are then going out to create what we're seeing. And then you're thinking about what the relationship between these figures and these two figures might be. Before, it's been suggested that this might be a teacher and these are learners. You're suggesting that perhaps this figure is reading to these figures and this one might be playing music in order to entertain them as they're working and help them pass the time. Okay, one last comment. What more can we find?
I think it's kind of like a sweatshop from the past, because the code or the thing that they're creating is emanating from the cauldron in the middle. And it seems like they're all doing the same thing. They all look kind of robotic, and that I think the person standing there is transmitting the code in which they're creating like a taskmaster. And the musician in the back is keeping time. So they're working at a specific rate.
Okay, so coming back to this, we're getting another interpretation. So previously, thinking about the socio-historical context of this, it's been suggested that these could be monks in a scriptorium working, these could be learners and a teacher, workers and people entertaining them, and now we're getting perhaps a darker view that these people are engaged in some kind of labor and something that could be like a sweatshop, and that this figure is there to kind of keep them on pace and is being assisted in that by this figure who could be playing music to a beat that would keep them working at a steady rate. Okay, so we'll stop there. And first, I guess we can all like, yeah. Deep looking is a really interesting experience. And so I thought maybe we would start with, I asked you to kind of keep track of some things. And I asked you what questions I asked. I asked you to pay attention to how I responded to people. And I asked you to pay attention to how I linked people's comments. And so now I want to kind of go through that. And hopefully you paid attention so that this will all kind of come together and bless you in a coherent fashion. So VTS questions are very simple. There's only 3 of them. So there's only 3 questions that the person who's leading the experience asks during the whole entire encounter. First, you invite people to look. You can say, hey, look at this image. And then afterwards, your first question is always, what's going on in this picture? And this is a really important question because sometimes we ask a different question that seems like it's the same, but it's not. What do you see? When you ask, what do you see, what you're likely to get from people is an unrelated catalog of everything that they can observe at that moment. And I'm not saying that that's not valuable, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't get back to Arnheim's central point that when we're looking at something, we're sorting out what we see as we're thinking and seeing and thinking and seeing. Because what your brain is doing anyway is it's involved in making a narrative. What this question does, what's going on in this picture, is it makes that process visible. And I don't care if it's a photograph hanging upstairs, a painting hanging out here, a photo that you see in Newsweek. It doesn't have to be an artwork. Yeah? What's going on in this picture? What's going on in this TV commercial? What's going on in this ad for perfume or liquor or dog food? Yeah? You can use this with any visual stimuli. And then, as you notice, people do what they do, is they're making a sense of what they're seeing, right? And they're making sense of that. And that's when people make an interpretive comment, such as they're reading. Yeah, there's no label on the painting that tells us what they're doing, right? It doesn't say they're reading, they're studying, they're writing, they're embroidering. So what we have to do is we have to push that back to the viewer and we have to say, what do you see that makes you say that? And that causes them to look again and ask themselves that question. Why did I say that? And that's a valuable thing we don't usually do. A lot of times as we're moving along in life, we decide what we've seen and we're like, and we're off. And we don't ask, well, what do I see that makes me say that? And the last question, what more can you find? What more can you find? And when I responded to you, you'll notice, I hope, that I didn't say, this is a man, this is a woman, they are wearing a uniform, they are doing this. Instead, I said, so this central figure could be a teacher. These people might be writing. You know, they're possibly engaged in playing music. And that conditional language is important because you need to keep people in the space of possibility. Because that's what you're trying to do, is multiply possibilities as you're looking. You're not trying to close them down on the right answer. Trying to let people proliferate potential meanings. And finally, as the facilitator is connecting people's comments, what they're doing is they're trying to link and frame them. So they might notice where people are in agreement, like, oh, you're also noticing the figures and thinking about what they might be doing. Or, oh, this person thought this, but you're thinking that actually it could be that, showing opposition. And then, of course, trying to elucidate what frames are people looking through. So you might be noticing the social context or the historical context, or you might be thinking the geography. You think this is happening in France. What frame are they looking through? Because that helps you understand where people's positions are coming from, and it helps the other people who are engaged in the discussion understand that. And then finally, I actually planted this guy in the audience who said, thanks for listening to me. The whole point of paraphrasing and pointing when people are talking is because you want to make sure that you're capturing what they were saying. But again, you're not just repeating straight back to them, you're paraphrasing it, but you're paraphrasing it so that they understand that you're trying to capture their content. You're really listening. So looking at this painting by Dalí, I think Alan's right. These might be people riding bikes with rocks on their heads. It seems weird that you'd be riding with something balanced on your head, but maybe it's a game. So you're also thinking about the activity that the figures are involved in, and you think, like Alan, that they might be riding bicycles. You also see what you think might be rocks on their heads and wonder whether this might be a game. What do you see that makes you say it might be a game? It's how you paraphrase back to someone what they've said. Or, I think those splotches on the circle look like countries on a map. Yeah, see, that one is shaped just like Africa on the map we have in our classroom. Paraphrase. Brianna's noticing these objects and thinking that they could be countries based on her experience of seeing the map in her classroom, and believes that this one could be Africa because of its shape. What more can we find? So, paraphrase. So those are the basic elements of visual thinking strategies or VTS. Now, I'm going to end by talking about what are its applications. So how do people use this outside of a museum, outside of what we just did? I hope it's obvious from just the experience that we had here, that very brief VTS session, about how that could be delightful and invigorating to do in front of a piece of work in a museum. So let's talk about how it might be used in other places. So VTS in the K-12 classroom. I'm just going to play for you a couple minutes of this video so you can see how the kids are using it in their classrooms.
What I like about VTS is when I raise my hand and Mr. Chimney calls on me and I have lots to say.
What's going on in this picture? Lots of hands today. If you need to take a closer look, you're more than welcome to. VTS stands for Visual Thinking Strategies. It's a way of thinking about art. It poses 3 questions to students who are looking at art, and those 3 questions are, what's going on in this picture? What do you see that makes you say that? And what more can you find? Okay, let's take about 20 more seconds.
We have several partner schools, both private, independent, as well as public schools. And what we do is we train classroom teachers in the visual thinking strategies methodology and get them up to speed in terms of how to engage their students with works of art on a regular basis in their classroom. And we recommend that they do this 9 times throughout the year. And then their 10th lesson takes place at the museum in the galleries where they engage their students in VTS discussions with real works of art.
What VTS does is warms kids up to get them ready to be critical thinkers. Students learn to be centered on their own learning. They learn to be involved in their own learning. I also think that students learn language skills. They learn listening skills from listening to one another. They also learn point of view. By listening to each other, they learn that someone else's point of view could be different than theirs, and they consider other points of view.
This is a little brief snippet. So when you're thinking about K-12 outcomes for using visual thinking strategies, we're obviously thinking about thinking skills. Hopefully just the little demo we did shows you how VTS pushes you to draw conclusions, make inferences, argue in evidence, elaborate on your point, and revise. Because sometimes you thought you saw something the first time, but then somebody else said something, and then you're like, maybe it's something different. Obviously, it enhances observation, can help with language learning, especially thinking about art. So for example, if you're a first-time visitor to an art museum, then you might not be familiar with things like composition. So somebody who is a first-time art viewer might say, yeah, this thing in the center of the canvas. And then the person who's doing VTS might say, oh, so you're noticing the composition of the piece or how it's put together. And you're thinking that this thing, seems to be in the center of the canvas and you're wondering why. So right there, you've introduced the concept of composition. So it could be language learning as well. And collaborative meaning making. And a very important skill, maybe one being lost, learning there's more than one right answer. VTS has also moved into medical education. And I'm going to play you a brief snippet of how it's being used with med students.
So there's the obvious close observation and communication skills that having discussions around art and looking at art can build. But more importantly, I think, are the higher level skills, the metacognitive skills where people learn to think about how they think, and they also can develop critical reasoning skills, which is really important for clinical reasoning, of course, where somebody has to make an interpretation based on evidence. And this visual thinking strategies really encourages people to ground their interpretations in visual evidence, which is important for doctors, of course, of all kinds.
How many of you want your doctors to be better lookers? Yes. So thinking about medical education outcomes, There's been a lot of research done on this, and there is a statistically significant improvement in observational skills of medical students who use VTS training. Makes them better observers, which in turn makes them better diagnosticians, and then leads to better treatment outcomes. And one of the ways that it can do that is it increases our tolerance for ambiguity. Yeah? We love to think that we know what we're looking at. And so ambiguity bothers most people. And it probably bothers doctors more than anything because they're being paid to not have ambiguity, right? It's this. But the more you can stay in the space of ambiguity, the more possibilities proliferate, so you can be sure you're picking the right one. And that's what we want for our doctors. And because you get to listen to different perspectives of people when you're doing VTS and hearing like where they're coming from, it also enhances empathy, which is a key skill for doctors, because we don't just want them for their technical skills. We want them for their people skills. And finally, VTS in business. And this is probably the application that I use most as the co-director of the innovation labs. I use this tool with a lot of the organizations that I work with. And I have this little clip from IDEO, which is a design thinking agency, and they're connected to the Stanford D School and a lot of really cool work that they do in the design thinking area. And I thought you might like what they have to say.
Slows you down so you can speed up. Most of the people I work with have a bias toward action. They're trying to produce and solve and create, and they want to do it quickly for clients, for themselves, for all kinds of reasons. But we really kind of shoot ourselves in the foot if we move so fast that we don't listen to everyone on the team, that we don't question the assumptions that we're making, if we don't take that time to take advantage, frankly, of all of these amazing brains and lived experiences that we have at our disposal. So one of the beautiful things these VTS discussions can do is to help everybody actually be more robust. The analysis is rooted in evidence-based reasoning through VTS, and it's a great way to do both robust analysis, but also to create psychological safety for everybody. You can speed things up by knowing that you've made your team, everyone on the team, feel they belong and they matter. Mm-hmm. Right.
So thinking about business outcomes, one of the things that it will help you with is better creative thinking. Because obviously you're trying to proliferate as many ideas as you can, it really helps with the concept of divergent thinking or divergent ideas. It also helps you combine and build because you're combining your ideas with others and building on them. Take multiple perspectives and again, tolerate ambiguity. Openness to new experience and tolerance for ambiguity are two of the qualities most correlated with creative thinking. So the more that you can keep space open for ideas and the more that you're open to hearing new things, the more creative you're going to be. It also helps with critical thinking, supporting ideas with evidence, rethinking your assumptions, and handling complexity. And in business, those are very important things. Obviously for your $1 million M&A, but also for something simple like the employee evaluation. How many of you have ever gone through an employee evaluation? And they have like the little check boxes or whatever. And you know what I want to do the next time I'm having one? And they're like, well, you're an 8 out of 10 on engagement. And I'm going to say, what do you see that makes you say that? And I bet they'd be hard pressed to tell you. Leads to more effective collaboration and helps you leverage the collective knowledge and experience of your team for better results. So those are some ways that VTS is being used in radically different environments than just the art museum, because remember, looking is connected to thinking, and that's connected to better looking, better thinking, better outcomes in any discipline in which you apply it. Which leads me back to, we're in a museum. What can you do right now with what we've just done? I welcome you to go upstairs. Check out our Subversive Eye exhibit. Here's a couple that I thought were really interesting. Stand there and ask yourself these questions. What's going on in this picture? And when you come up with something, challenge yourself. What do I see that makes me say that? And then when you think you're tapped out, what more can I find? And if you're lucky enough to be here with somebody else, then you can engage in a lively dialogue, double, triple, quadruple the observations and the insights that you are making. And with that, I thank you. And this is probably my best ever. I rarely am a good time manager, but I finally clocked in almost exactly on the hour for the Coffee with the Curator. Whoa. First time I ever did one back in the day with, I think it was the Magritte exhibit. I was like an hour and a half. So count yourselves lucky. Any questions before we're out for today? So Joy has the microphone. She's going to bring it around.
VTS applied to figurative paintings, it seems tremendously useful. How would you apply it if you had a Mark Rothko abstract in front of 10 folks?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because one of the things that you realize when you start training to facilitate VTS is that you realize image selection is as important or more important than the leading of the discussion. And you need to pick images that are appropriate for the audiences that you're sharing them with. So I definitely probably wouldn't pick a Rothko for a very novice audience, because I feel like it's the kind of experience where it's kind of like if you take somebody who has very dense poetry and you're like, here, beginning reader of poetry, take The Wasteland. That's going to be a heavy lift and probably not enjoyable and probably turn them off poetry forever. So you want to choose your images wisely. For the right audience of viewers who are already adept at looking at representational and abstract works of art, I think you could have a very interesting discussion about a Rothko.
Could you suggest, for example, a question that you might ask about a Rothko in front of people?
It's the same questions. What's going on in this picture? What do you see that makes you say that? What more can you find? You never vary the questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Somebody here in the front? Joy's bringing the mic.
I'm going to ask you a question. I've been living here in St. Petersburg for over 20 years, and I do have people coming here and saying, I'd like to see the Dalí Museum, but 99% of them know nothing about Dalí. And I have found that the only way I tell them that we will go to the museum if we have a docent explain what you're looking at. And I have found that when I do that, these people get much more involved in the painting, and they understand them. And so it's kind of like a jump start. And instead of saying, what do you see? Somebody else tells them what they should be looking at, and all of a sudden, they found beauty in it, and they want to come back. I had one brother that came here that works in a factory, and I couldn't get him out of here. He just loved it because he knew what he was looking at. Thank you.
Of course, and again, I think this is again related back to the aesthetic stages. People's comfort levels are always going to be attached to what kind of learning experiences they feel more comfortable with. And most of our learning experiences in the US are learning experiences that center the teacher as the font of knowledge and expertise. And so it's not surprising to me that people would gravitate towards that. And again, VTS is not a replacement for a docent tour or a lecture or anything like that. It is an augmentation. It's another way to tour the gallery. And I think it could offer a different experience for a novice. And I think it could offer a really rich experience for someone who thinks they've heard it all about the paintings. So I never would suggest that it's a replacement, because I love going on docent tours. and listening to everybody's unique interpretations, because everybody has an interest. Some people are really interested in Dalí's personal life. Some people are really interested in the socio-historical context. Some people are really interested in the art historical minutiae. And it always gives me a different perspective. But I think I personally am able to take in all of those because I already know so much about the paintings. So everyone is kind of like laying a layer on top of this. But I think VTS is really good at giving you an experience where you can deeply engage with the work and realize something key. And I'm sorry for going on so long, but I'm a teacher, right? I was a professor. I've been a secondary teacher. And I found that the more I centered my own expertise, the less my students learned. The more that I engaged them in coming to the knowledge that I already had, the better they learned. And that has just been my experience as an educator.
Okay, I have a quick question. I never ask a question, but VTS in the medical field. So I was thinking, running through different scenarios in my head of how would we apply this as, am I asking the 3 questions to my doctor, like, what's going on? What else do you see, you know? Like, I don't think I want to go through that, but, you know. Or are they speaking amongst themselves, like doctors in a room looking at your charts or something?
So a lot of the ways this has been applied is in medical school. Okay. So they're working with medical students. However, last year, in 2024, I did a series of workshops with TGH, Tampa General Hospital, to support their Innovation Week. And I gave 3 VTS workshops to their staff members. And we're talking about, maybe doing some more. So it can also be a part of a doctor's continuing education. Again, we're always looking for tools, right? Like, unless we're very complacent, which I hope we're not, with how much we know, how much we see, how much we're able to engage, unless we're complacent, we're always looking for tools. We're looking for new tools, things that can push us to a higher level of performance. And that's what I think this is. So yeah, I wouldn't suggest the next time your doctor diagnoses you to say, well, what do you see that makes you say that? I don't know. Yeah, it could work. But more so this is part of a doctor's educational practice, whether that be medical school or whether that be continuing education. So if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to come up and ask me afterwards. But thank you so much for coming out today. I appreciate it.